For more than 3 decades of televised courtroom battles, viewers thought they had seen every kind of confrontation imaginable. They had watched frauds collapse under pressure, arrogant defendants unravel in seconds, and unforgettable verdicts reshape the public's idea of justice. But nothing in those 35 years prepared anyone for what happened on that Tuesday morning. Because the man stepping through those courtroom doors was not there as a defendant. He was a sitting state senator. And he arrived believing he was the one with the authority. Senator Richard Harland entered Judge Judy Sheindlin's courtroom with the confidence of someone who had spent an entire lifetime insulated from consequences. 58 years old, silver-haired, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, worth more than many families spent in months. He carried himself like a man, accustomed to watching people move aside when he entered a room. 3 terms in the state Senate had taught him exactly how power worked. As chairman of the Judiciary Committee, he helped determine the futures of judges across the state. Careers rose or fell depending on his influence. And he came prepared. Behind him walked his private attorney. A public relations aide followed close by. A separate camera crew from his office hovered near the entrance. Under his arm sat a leather-bound folder, embossed with the official Senate seal. Inside it was a formal motion demanding Judge Judy's immediate suspension from television. Only 14 minutes earlier, standing before reporters outside the courthouse, Harland had declared that Judge Judy represented a dangerous example of judicial misconduct and political bias that could no longer be ignored. He also carried a petition supposedly signed by 40,000 people calling for her removal. He held it like men, such as him, always hold power, with certainty like a weapon. Like proof the outcome had already been decided. Before entering the building, he paused for the cameras and delivered the line his media team had polished for days. Judge Judy runs a circus, not a courtroom. Today the circus ends. He said it without hesitation, without blinking, like a man who had never once questioned his own authority. But Senator Richard Harland had made a fatal mistake. What he did not know, what nobody in that courtroom knew except one person, was that Judge Judy had been waiting for him for nearly a year. For 11 months, her research staff had quietly traced a pattern of cases tied to Harland's political donors. And the night before he arrived with his petition, his cameras, and his carefully rehearsed outrage, Judge Judy sat alone at her desk reading through a state ethics complaint. Harland had personally helped bury. She read every page. Then she read it again. Afterward, she slid the documents into a manila folder and told her producer something before filming even began the next morning. Don't cut this episode. What followed would become one of the most replayed moments in courtroom television history. 23 seconds. That was all it took. 23 seconds of silence so crushing, so complete, that law professors would later dissect it in classrooms as a perfect example of what happens when political arrogance collides with preparation. The footage spread across the country almost instantly. Harland's mouth opening without sound, his hand gripping the table, his eyes darting around the room searching for an escape that did not exist. 97 million views in 4 days. Legal analysts called it one of the most devastating public dismantlings of a powerful figure ever captured on live television. The phrase, "silence the senator," exploded across social media for nearly a week. But none of those headlines captured what it felt like inside that courtroom in the seconds before everything collapsed. The moment Judge Judy asked one question, one quiet, precise question aimed directly at the single secret Harland believed nobody in the room could possibly know. The color vanished from his face so quickly that one audience member later admitted she thought the senator might actually faint. But to understand why Senator Harland walked into that courtroom, convinced he controlled the outcome, you have to go back 6 weeks earlier, back to a small claims complaint nobody in his office considered important. It arrived in a plain manila envelope, mailed by a retired school teacher named Rosa Mendez. Rosa was 67 years old. She had spent over 3 decades teaching 4th grade at the same elementary school, just blocks from the apartment where she had lived for 11 years. She had buried her husband 4 years earlier, after pancreatic cancer destroyed their savings. Since then, she survived on a modest Social Security check and stretched every dollar carefully. Rosa was not confrontational. She was the kind of woman who graded papers on weekends, cooked for sick neighbors, and spent Sundays with her grandchildren. Exactly the kind of person men like Garrett Wills counted on staying silent. Garrett Wills was 44 and built his real estate empire through political access rather than talent. His company owned 14 apartment buildings concentrated in neighborhoods slowly being transformed by rising property values. Longtime tenants became obstacles. Wills knew how to remove obstacles: luxury SUV, charity board memberships, endless photos shaking hands with politicians at fundraising dinners, and over 6 years, his companies donated nearly $400,000 to one politician, Senator Richard Harland. Not because Wills admired his politics, because Harlan solved problems. Rosa's trouble started when black mold spread across her bathroom ceiling and kitchen wall. She filed maintenance requests. Nothing happened. Weeks passed. She contacted the city housing authority. That decision changed everything. 10 days later, Rosa received an eviction notice accusing her of repeated lease violations, excessive noise complaints, and unauthorized damage to the apartment. None of it was true. Rosa was a widow who went to sleep before 10 o'clock every night and had never even hung a nail in the walls. But the paperwork was official, the language was intimidating, and she had no money for legal help. Then Wills withheld her $3,200 security deposit, the savings she had scraped together more than a decade earlier. When Rosa tried contacting management, she was warned that further communication would be considered harassment. She had nowhere left to turn. Legal aid offices were overwhelmed. Private attorneys wanted retainers she could never afford. Her daughter was struggling to support children of her own. For 3 weeks, Rosa sat staring at that envelope on her kitchen table before finally sealing it and mailing it to the Judge Judy show. What Rosa never realized was that her case arrived at the exact moment Judge Judy's team had already been investigating Garrett Wills for months. Another tenant complaint had surfaced the year before, then another. The same company names, the same evictions after maintenance complaints, the same confiscated deposits. Researchers started digging. Public records revealed 31 similar complaints tied to Wills' properties across multiple housing databases. And running through nearly every thread of the investigation was the same political name: Senator Richard Harland, campaign donations, zoning approvals, tenant advocacy groups losing state funding shortly after challenging Wills' company. Judge Judy reviewed the files herself, quietly, without saying much. Then, 10 days after Rosa's case was accepted for filming, something extraordinary happened. The production office received an official letter on state Senate letterhead. Signed by Harlan's chief of staff, the letter raised jurisdictional concerns and formally requested the case be withdrawn pending review from state broadcasting authorities. In all the years of the program, producers had never seen anything like it. Judge Judy read the letter once, placed it in a folder, and instructed producers to continue filming exactly as planned. Over the next several weeks, researchers uncovered even more: campaign finance records, corporate filings, and finally, a buried ethics complaint filed by one of Harlan's former staff members. The accusation claimed Harland had improperly intervened in a judicial matter on behalf of a political donor. The complaint had been officially logged, then quietly dismissed by committee vote. The committee conducting the vote? Harlan's own Judiciary Committee. The night before filming, Judge Judy read the complaint in silence and wrote 4 words across a yellow legal pad. Then she closed the folder and went home. The next morning, before cameras rolled, she passed her producer and calmly said, "Don't cut this episode." The atmosphere inside the courtroom felt different long before proceedings began. Audience members sensed it immediately. Extra security, additional cameras, unreal people moving through production areas. Something important was about to happen. Then Senator Harland entered. He walked slowly. The deliberate pace of a man accustomed to controlling rooms simply by entering them. His attorney remained just behind him, while his PR aide monitored everything from the sidelines. Harland placed his leather folder carefully on the table and stared at Judge Judy the way executives stare at employees summoned for discipline. Judge Judy stared back without moving, without blinking. With the expression of someone who had already reached the end of a conversation nobody else realized had started. Harland cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "this proceeding represents a dangerous pattern of judicial overreach my office can no longer ignore." Every sentence sounded rehearsed. He spoke about accountability, about protecting legal institutions, about preserving judicial integrity. Then came the centerpiece of his statement. He called the courtroom a stage. He dismissed the rulings as theatrical performances rather than legitimate legal judgments. And finally, with complete confidence, he delivered the line his advisors had prepared so carefully. "I have both the authority and the obligation to recommend your removal from this platform." The room fell silent. Judge Judy never changed expression. But longtime viewers recognized the slight smile beginning at the corner of her mouth. Not warmth, not amusement, recognition. The kind of smile that appears when someone already knows how the story ends. She let the silence stretch exactly as long as she wanted, then leaned forward. "Senator Harland," she said quietly, "as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, are you currently under any active ethics investigations?" The question hit like a physical blow. 11 calm words. No theatrics, no raised voice, just precision. For 1 second, Harland's face remained still. Then something shifted. His attorney reacted first, objecting immediately. Judge Judy ignored him completely. Harland forced a small laugh. "That's irrelevant to these proceedings," he answered. Judge Judy nodded slowly. "We'll come back to that." 4 simple words, but the entire courtroom felt the atmosphere change. Even the senator's PR aide stopped typing and looked up for the first time. Judge Judy did not reach for the folder yet. Instead, she turned toward Rosa. "Tell me what happened." Rosa spoke carefully and clearly. About the mold, about her grandson coughing during visits, about finding the eviction notice on Christmas Eve, after grocery shopping for her grandchildren, about sitting at her kitchen table with her coat still on. Because she could not understand how her life had unraveled so suddenly. The courtroom listened in complete silence. Then, during Rosa's explanation of her withheld security deposit, a sound came from the senator's side of the room, a scoff, small, dismissive. But everyone heard it. Rosa stopped talking. Judge Judy slowly turned toward Harland. "Did you just laugh, Senator?" He recovered quickly. "I simply find it interesting," he replied, "that this woman chose television instead of proper legal channels. It was a polished political answer, and it lasted about 4 seconds. Judge Judy reached for a document beside her. "She chose this program," Judge Judy said, "because your donor's attorneys sent cease and desist warnings to legal aid offices throughout the district discouraging representation against Will's premier properties." She held up the letter. "Would you like me to read it aloud?" Nobody answered. Then Judge Judy finally placed the thick manila folder directly on the desk. The senator's attorney saw the ethics board seal first. His expression changed instantly. Judge Judy opened the folder calmly and began reading. Ethics Complaint Case 22247B. Allegation: improper interference with judicial proceedings on behalf of campaign donors. Status: dismissed by committee vote. Committee Chairman: Richard Harland. Then she closed the folder. Silence, gomsable silence. Judge Judy looked directly at him. "You buried your own ethics complaint using the committee you controlled," she said quietly. and then walked into my courtroom demanding my removal." Harland opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His attorney touched his arm. Harland pulled away. His hand gripped the table edge, while his eyes searched the room desperately for a way out. There wasn't one. Audience members covered their mouths in disbelief. The cameras captured every second. 23 seconds of total silence. A powerful senator unable to produce a single word because the truth had just been spoken aloud in front of millions. Judge Judy allowed every second to unfold. Then she leaned forward. "For 35 years, she said, criminals tried to bribe me. Lawyers tried to intimidate me. Powerful people tried to threaten me. And you thought you could walk in here with a petition and silence me." She paused. "Let me make something very clear." Another inch forward. "I don't get removed. I retire. And I'm not ready yet." The courtroom exploded. Judge Judy ruled swiftly afterward. Garrett Wills was ordered to return Rosa's full security deposit, pay punitive damages for retaliatory eviction, and cover medical expenses connected to mold exposure. Then she looked directly at him. "You used a United States senator as an attack dog against a retired school teacher," she said coldly. "The fact that it failed says everything about you." Harland attempted to speak. Judge Judy raised one finger. He sat back down instantly. By then, his PR aide had already left the room to begin damage control. When Harland finally stood to leave, he stumbled, slightly descending the platform steps. The cameras captured everything: the expensive suit, the trembling hands, the ash-colored face. He never looked back at Judge Judy. Rosa did not celebrate. She simply sat quietly with tears running down her cheeks. And when the gavel fell, she whispered softly, "Thank you." Judge Judy turned toward her and nodded once. Not for the audience, not for the cameras, just one quiet acknowledgement between two women who understood exactly what had happened in that room. The footage exploded online within hours. Not the verdict, not the ethics complaint. The silence, those 23 unbearable seconds followed by 7 unforgettable words. "I don't get removed. I retire." The ethics investigation into Harland reopened within days. Donors abandoned him. Colleagues distanced themselves publicly. 19 days later, Senator Richard Harland resigned as Judiciary Committee chairman. Garrett Wills faced lawsuits from former tenants emboldened by Rosa's story. Housing reform legislation followed shortly afterward, and Rosa Mendez, the woman who once believed nobody would listen, was eventually invited to testify before the same housing committee Harland had once controlled. When reporters later asked Judge Judy whether Harland's threats had frightened her, she answered with a sentence that spread almost as quickly as the original clip itself. "I've never needed permission to tell the truth," she said. "I'm not about to start now." Because in the end, this was never just about a courtroom. It was about power. About the people who believe titles and influence make them untouchable. And about what happens when someone finally refuses to be intimidated. Harland believed authority protected him. Rosa believed her voice did not matter. Judge Judy proved that truth does not ask permission when the right person is willing to speak it aloud.